If you've been a viewer of this channel for a while, then you probably already know every Gen 8 Pokemon is British. Every new Pokemon in this game is British! Every new Pokemon is British, hence the every Gen 8 Pokemon being British thing. And that could not be more true with Galars Starter Pokemon. But there is more to them than just a 007 chameleon actor with an abusive childhood, a Tarzan conservationist commercial drummer druid, and a rabbit playing soccer for its
life, because if it loses it's going to be sacrificed to Huitzli, the god of war and games, who is a giant fireball in the sky!
So yeah, let's talk about the lore and design origins of these 9 Pokemon. These are the lorigins of Galars Starters, or First Partner Pokemon, since that's what we're going with now. So first things first, Grookey and Thwackey got groove. They are on-key monkeys that thwack with their sticks. Numerous monkeys are famous for being among the few animals capable of using or even creating tools. And apes and monkeys often... Egad, it's like a heavy metal punk rock drummer just going ham with some sticks. It's so cool. So of course, these Pokemon beating things up willy-nilly with a stick is par for the course. But actually, certain species of macaques are known to rhythmically smack branches and rocks as a display of dominance, as it both shows their strength with the beating and their intelligence with the keeping of the tempo. It's just like Thwackey, according to the Pokédex. The faster a Thwackey can beat out a rhythm with its 2 sticks, the more respect it wins from its peers. Same hat. Think of those crazy drummers at like marching bands and doing drum rolls and stuff. And honestly, take this macaque behavior and apply it to a much cuter squirrel monkey, and I think that's Grookey perfectly. Just add in some early human elements like the classic bone or stick in hair caveman, and there you go. Grookey and Thwackey's hair explained. That connection is fitting too because humans have had music and percussion-based instruments for longer than we've had writing. Perhaps even longer than we've had speech. At least as we think of defining speech today, anyway. The earliest surviving excavated drum we have is from around 6000 BCE. A drum made from a hollow tree trunk, no less. Almost like Rillaboom's slice of tree drum. Though the real drum had stretched reptile skin across it. There's no Scrafty on there, right? But if ancient people knew how to make drums like that by then how much longer ago were we just ham-boning? Plus, this caveman connection works doubly because they are often depicted wielding clubs, which are really just big bonk sticks, just like Grookey. As a Thwackey though, it gets 2 bonk sticks, or 2 drumsticks, but still the thick ones, like the ones used to play large war drums. Many peoples across the world and throughout history have utilized large drums to literally drum up their soldiers. Hence the saying, a drum-based rhythm can help keep a marching army going at the same pace, or keep the warship rowers in sync so the oars don't clash. It can embolden and boost the morale of the soldiers too when out camping, or even on an active battlefield. Literally bard buff stuff. And this is especially the case when talking about ritual battles, which many early humans did and some indigenous cultures still do, though without the killing nowadays, thankfully. But that indigenous connection may relate to Thwackey's leafy floof. It's tied down when the sticks are in its hair, like hair chopsticks, but when it pulls them out to fight or play, bam! Leaf Mohawk, a hairstyle that itself came from the indigenous Mohawk nation. Though, a true Mohawk hairstyle involved pulling out the hair in small chunks at a time until there was only a small square around the top and back of the head, which would then be tied into braids with feathers tied into them during ceremonies. But the Mohawk you know today later became popular with punk rock and metal bands, which themselves are famous for extremely rapid and heavy use of drums. And as we explored in the videos discussing Toxtricity and Teen Yell, the punk rock genre and aesthetic got its start in the UK, perfectly linking up to Galar, which is based on Great Britain. And that connection is very good because otherwise, so far these monkeys have nothing to do with Britain at all. Like the whole British Empire at its peak? Sure, macaques live in India and throughout Southeast Asia, which the British Empire had control over for some time, but otherwise there's not much until we evolve it, that is. Now, as a big Rillaboom, it has left its monkey business behind. It's an ape gorilla. It's got a whole tree trunk drum now, and it bangs on it in a similar style to Japanese taiko drums. But when Gigantamaxed, it becomes an entire drum set. Still made from tree though. Overall, in and of itself, it could be a reference to the world-famous British chocolate company Cadbury's drumming gorilla-based ad campaign mascot thing in the mid-2000s. But the first thing I think of with the mention of British gorilla is Jane Goodall, world-famous conservationist who who specializes in apes, though chimps primarily, gorillas secondarily. She's considered the world's greatest chimp expert, and she works closely together with Dion Fossey, the world's best gorilla expert, to help set up many national parks throughout Africa and the world, and even founded a few major conservational institutes. But that's not all. British gorilla also makes me think of Tarzan, a very famous story about a British family stranded in the African jungle. The parents die, and Tarzan is then raised by gorillas. 20 years later, other British explorers are in the area, and the plot unfolds. Honestly, Rillaboom's bush hair feels very reminiscent of Disney's depiction of Tarzan, at least to me. It could just be more big rock band hair though. The gorillas themselves are in Britain too. Not natively, of course, though. This is Alfred the gorilla, who lived in England's Bristol Zoo and became internationally famous during World War II, and has since become the city's mascot. And a musician too. Alfred was featured beating his chest on British radio broadcasts in 1937. Quite musical indeed. Male gorillas famously beat their chests to show their strength and dominance, and they'll sometimes have drum battles before going into any real fighting too. And fun fact, a group of gorillas is called a band. So we've once again come full circle back to music, which brings us to why it's grass type. On top of being a gorilla, that is, there's a long-running theory that music can help stimulate plant growth, and different genres stimulate different plants differently. And it sounds plausible. Music is just sound. Sound causes vibrations in the air. Those vibrations could help the plant distribute nutrients more efficiently. And there have been quite a few studies on this. The smaller scale studies show some promise, though of course some of them have to lean on things saying like, good wholesome classical Christian music helps them grow, while icky satanic rock music hurts them. So real scientists are skeptical. And every larger scale scientific study on the subject concludes that while it's potentially possible for sound waves to have some effect, it's not notable enough to be considered factual. But the idea lives on. Actually, maybe we could apply the idea of worm grunting to plants. With a pair of worm sticks, you stick one in the ground, rub the other one against it to cause vibrations, and the worms stinking hate that, so they leave. And now you have easy access to delicious worms, as they've popped out of the ground, not unlike a small plant sprout. And now also consider the idea of rain dances and fertility rituals. Drumming up song and dance around a fire to pray to the gods for a good harvest. Again, we've been doing this for longer than we've kept track of it. But of course, Pokemon takes it to an extreme, especially in the case of Gigantamax Rillaboom, who has full-on plant-bending powers now through the use of music. Whack. And actually, it having a Gigantamax form may relate back to another ape. And I don't just mean King Kong, who may have also played some role in making Rillaboom Gigantamaxable, but no, I'm talking about the Gigantopithecus, a huge sort of in-between of a gorilla and an orangutan, which itself is notable because of those long orangutan arms, like G-Max Rillaboom's long bush arms. Plus, that would explain why regular Rillaboom is actually quite a bit bigger than gorillas really are, with a height of 6'11", whereas most gorillas are an average of 5 foot, and the big dominant male leaders are still a foot shorter than Rillaboom at only 6 foot, and that's when standing all the way up. Rillaboom is big. Gigantopithecus is only known from its teeth and jaw bones, so it's hard to nail down its exact size, but even the most conservative of estimates place big male Gigantopithecus at least 400 pounds, which is about double the weight of modern silverback gorillas. And while a lot of examples of Gigantopithecus in popular media, like ARC, often portray it as some sort of Bigfoot or giant gorilla, Gigantopithecus's closest living relative is actually the orangutan. And nowadays, most serious paleo artists portray it more like a big orangutan that's bulky and muscular like a gorilla, and have it walk on all fours like a gorilla, which is probably part of why shiny Rillaboom is much more orangey in color, as a way to point to the orangutaniness of Gigantopithecus. But now let's talk more plant-bending powers. Let's talk druids. These days, when you hear druid, most think of the nature-loving mages from Dungeons & Dragons, who use plant powers and can speak and transform into animals, and that's actually not too far off from reality, aside from the whole transforming part. Real druids came about around the 3rd century BC within the Celtic and Gallic cultures, which includes the British Isles, where many historians also pinpoint as the birthplace of the practice. They were essentially the ancient world's version of high tree-hugging hippies, crossed with a priest, a mage, and a witch doctor. They were religious leaders leaders, in tune with the gods, the fae, and the nature spirits all around them. Though the specifics of their beliefs are not very well known because, while literate, they purposefully did not write down their daily doings or beliefs because then druids and non-druids alike could simply look up their beliefs and rituals rather than properly learning and memorizing them from a fellow druid, much to the dismay of historians. And so what we do know about the magics and rituals they did most often is thanks to Roman historians. And they aren't exactly the most factual when it comes to foreigners they plan to eventually conquer. But it's still all we got. So interestingly, unlike most pagan magic at the time, which was more so associated with things like candles, blood, bones, souls, and the like, druid magic was just like their diets, entirely plant-based. They had rituals to heal the sick using herbs and chants, possibly even music. They would use plants and rituals to cause the rains to come in, to grow more plants in their fields. Plant growth not unlike what the Rillaboom line causes. They would appease nature spirits by growing their favorite plants in exchange for knowledge and inspiration. Those are the plants they likely got high off of. But even the word druid comes from the Irish Gaelic word for oak tree, which themselves were also symbols of wisdom. They were all wise tree men. A description that could actually fit some monkeys today. Wise tree men of the jungle. And they had to be wise because the druids were the leaders in and of themselves. When it came to a druid's leadership roles, it was their duty to calm down disputes between families and clans, often with plants. Though they have a calm disposition, they won't tolerate those who drum up discord. They would strictly discipline offenders until they learned their lesson. And that's actually one of Rillaboom's dex entries I just read. But it also perfectly describes the leadership roles the druids took. But don't hear all of that and assume they were all nice, peace-loving, good, hippy-dippy guys, right? Because they also did this. Good ol' human sacrifice. Now take a look at the Green Man, a very British symbol found all over the region these days, which harkens back to the pagan and druidic origins of the region. It depicts a wise man with leafy foliage all over his face, sometimes all over his body, which of course just makes me think of Rillaboom's hair. And this symbol, this icon, this dude, is such a part of the culture it even found itself prominently displayed on the 2023 invites to the coronation of King Charles. And it being there caused quite a controversy among English Christians because it's pagan, completely unlike Christmas and Easter, they say, not realizing that many of the churches and cathedrals in the region also depict the Green Man. Actually, not just these stained glass ones I'm showing you now. Nearly all of the examples I've shown you so far are on churches in Great Britain. The Green Man symbol finds himself in many music festivals as well and became a big part of hippie culture and the music associated with them in the 1960s. Perhaps just further linking it to Rillaboom. Maybe he's a Ringo reference. A Ringorilla, a Ringorilla, a Ringorilla, a Ringorilla. But those leafy arm cuff things, they're kinda like those ostentatious jacket sleeves that a lot of classic rock stars had. Maybe. It's curious. Curious, like why this chameleon is so dang sad. Sobble, what's wrong? Oh, you know, I think I know what would cheer you up, Sobble. Here, look at this. This video was sponsored by Zen Market. Don't you ever wish you could get some Japan-only merchandise from your favorite games and anime, but you can't because you're not in Japan? Well, then let Zen Market be in Japan for you.
Oh, you think this Easter Scorbunny's cute? Well, just you wait for Larry.
Zen Market is a Japanese proxy shopping service with access to more than 10,000 online stores, which means through them you now have access to all those amazing bits of Japan-only goods and merchandises. Bag. Bronzor. Mirror, look, it's you! They've even got small cooking appliances with Pokemon on them, but we don't talk about it. Browsing Zen Market is easy, and you can even copy and paste Japan-only product URLs directly into their product search bar, and there it is. Japan-only board games, perfect for learning the language in. I mean, we got little disc shooting mini games. This is basically a yokai watch. I am a grown man playing with a bath time Pikachu plush. Let's find out what expression we got. Splish. Everything you could want gets shipped to their warehouse, and then they ship it to you. It's a fun adventure, and to learn more, check them out with the link below, and make sure you sign up with the code Lockstin to get 1,000 Zen points.
Tell me your secrets!
It was Pikachu. So now, let's see how Sobble's doing. So how was that, Sobble? Do you feel better now? That's good. So let's talk about you now. Sobble, being able to turn invisible when in the water is very akin to many cartoon chameleons and chameleon-like monsters being able to turn completely invisible too, which itself is just an exaggeration of the real-world chameleon being an expert at changing its color and camouflaging into its surroundings. However, those surroundings are typically, trees? Not water? So what's up with that? Well, some other lizards are up with that, like the marine iguana, who only eats the tasty algal film found on underwater and tide pool rocks. And more notably, there's the basilisk, aka the Jesus lizard, famous for being able to run on top of water for short distances and also being pretty good swimmers. And many of them have these tall crests on their backs and head, like the yellow flag on Sobble and its final Evo, Intelleon. But let's talk more about its middle Evo first, Drizzile. Why is it so emo? Well, focusing in on the personalities of this line, we see that it references a, unfortunately, somewhat common way that some people grow up. Sobble is easily frightened to tears and is nervous and anxious, shyly hiding away invisibly in the water like a little scared worrywart child, always told that everyone in the world is out to get them and they are always being watched, be it by their helicopter parents, their teachers, or other authority figures, maybe God, so they better not get into trouble or do anything, even privately, because it's being watched. The only thing you can do to not be watched is to become invisible. And then, upon evolving into an adolescent teen, it starts up the classic emo phase, sad and dreary, some small bit of subtle rebellion in the only way that they are allowed to rebel, with their hair. I had a teenage emo phase. I was super, well, it was the style at the time. Drizzile's particular emo aesthetic is a sort of branch of the typical punk look that started in the UK, especially with the streak of colored hair, which, along with the odd choice of colors for the hands and feet, could be a reference to the veiled chameleon, who keeps stripes and patches of other colors all around it. But I like this deck's entry. Highly intelligent, but also very lazy. Yep, like the sad emo nerd in high school. Definitely smart enough to pull off a perfect grade every time, but just too depressed to find the motivation to do it, so it gets called lazy.
He's very smart, you know, if he'd just apply himself.
This Pokemon battles using water balloons created with moisture secreted from its palms. That's kind of gross, but also a fun connection. It's got sweaty palms because it's still so nervous all the time. Drizzile is like a teen, finally learning how the world actually works and just how many different types of people live in it, but they still just nervously have to keep the fact that they know that knowledge a secret from their parents lest they get in trouble. So they hide their true knowledge. They hide their true colors, like a chameleon. But eventually, they find freedom and come out of their shell like a Drizzile into an Intelleon. It grows up and out of its emo phase. Now it's an intelligent chameleon who gathers intel like a spy. Now's a good time to mention that in the Galarian Pokédex, Sobble is number 007, and of course there is no British spy more famous than the iconic James Bond Agent 007, main character of the biggest British movie franchise ever. And of course, being able to turn invisible as a chameleon helps with spy work, as is having some great intelligence and people skills. You see, growing up shy and quiet and reserved and masking your true knowledge and your true intentions to avoid getting in trouble can actually help you a lot in jobs like this, because from a young age, you spend less time actually talking and interacting with others and more time observing them. You learn how people, what makes them tick. You gather intel on them, learn their secrets, their own body language, their own speech mannerisms. That way you can more properly plan out your conversations in advance. This could entirely be subconscious because you don't want to mess up. Maybe you eventually learn to manipulate those around you for one reason or another, likely just to protect yourself. You put on different masks around different people to fit in better, to not make a scene, to blend in. Perhaps like a chameleon actor, a term for an actor who can fit any role. Perhaps you are even like a spy. You yourself even know how to keep your own secrets well because you did so your whole life, even with things you really didn't have to. And once you learn that you can manipulate others, you start getting more and more confident in that, eventually becoming more laid back and suave. The perfect storm to become a sniper spy. Oh yeah, because Intelleon is also a sniper. It picks out foes' weak points so it can precisely blast them with water that shoots from its fingertips at Mach 3. Which is what snipers do, especially in the case of assassination. They need to learn all of the routines of their target, spy on them to know when and where they are most vulnerable, and then from a tall tower far away like Gigantamax Intelleon, they strike. Hits like this are usually done from tall buildings because being higher up, of course, gives you a better view and fewer obstacles in your line of fire. So of course, when Gigantamaxing, all that Intelleon really does is grow its tail huge like a tower and pull out a bigger water gun. A proper rifle instead of its little James Bond-esque pistol fingers. Speaking of those fingers though, the spy connection is probably why it has black hands too. Gloves to not leave any fingerprints. It has a nictitating membrane that goes over its eyes like mini lizards, but Intelleon's is specifically darker, resembling spy glasses or vision-based scanning gadgets. Then its body resembles a tight jumpsuit of sorts, another common part of spyware, but more specifically, Intelleon's is perhaps a wingsuit. I mean, once the shot from up high has been taken, you gotta get out of there, and no way is faster than leaping out of the window. Wingsuits like this are also common spy gadgets in movies, as silly as they look, and the first use of them was actually right next door to England in 1912 France. Though the guy died after jumping from the Eiffel Tower, but more recently wingsuits got a commercial overhaul and are much safer now. Unlike Cinderace. Cinderace is not safe. But let's start with Scorbunny. Scorbunny is a rabbit that runs fast because rabbits run fast, who knew? It can also leave trails of fire behind it because its feet are super hot. And also leaving behind flames when running or going fast is a common thing in cartoons and such. Also, it is literally hot-footed. Figuratively, being hot-footed means working with haste, rushing things, but eagerly. And that's definitely fitting of its personality. And in its case, it's literally hot-footed too, with the fire type and the flame trails and all. But it's also the name of a prank, one where you put a match under the sole of someone's shoe and it slowly burns, which is fitting because that's exactly where Scorbunny's foot heat comes from too. But what is it all excited and eager about? Well, soccer, of course, or football if you're anywhere else but here. Scorbunny likes to wrap flames around small rocks it finds and kick them about like a soccer ball. Football is the most popular sport in the UK after all, and the world, but actually it got its start in the UK, officially anyway. The very earliest example of a team sport that involves similar rules to soccer happened 3,000 years ago in Mesoamerica, known simply as the Mesoamerican ball game. But if you're skilled enough at words, it's also called You know how Cinderace kicks a rock around as a ball that it sets ablaze to kick? Well, that's not too far off from this ball game. The ball they used for this game was made from a rock, but was then wrapped in rubber, and sometimes for the more serious games they'd use a human skull wrapped in rubber. But I wouldn't expect this Pokemon to find human skulls strewn about the place to kick them around, so a rock it is. So what do I mean by more serious games? Well, for many, this game was more than merely a simple game. It had a lot of religious significance. The rock ball represented the fiery sun, and the two sides of the court were the heavens. It was day and night, and the game was played to keep the sun moving. More specifically, they would take the captain of the losing team and sacrifice them to keep the sun moving. Yeah, so soccer-y ball game players went from fighting for their lives to falling over fake dead because they got called a funny name. But hey, at least we aren't playing a sport to sacrifice people anymore. Now we just sacrifice basic human decency. But keep that ball is the sun part in mind because we'll come back to that. So during this Mesoamerican ball game, players would often wear headdresses resembling animals or even actual animal heads, almost like furries today. Thus, Cinderace is a furry. Moving away from that joke, Toxiquid is an Aztec group of divine rabbits that get together a lot and drink and party and celebrate. Think about sports parties. You know how crazy people get with their drunken parties during the World Cup? And on the note of divine rabbits, the Mayans have a story about the sun chasing down a white rabbit, catching it, and putting it on the moon, hence the moon rabbit. But now let's jump forward a bit to the 2nd and 3rd centuries where, independently, China invented a sport, a game they called Kuju. A game of Kuju involved a round ball and was played on a square field, and was so popular that it spread all over Asia, even to Japan, where it was played in ceremonial events. Parties and things, like those partying rabbits. Then, later on, Greece and Rome also independently invented a different but similar sport. The Greeks' balls were leathery and vigorously slapped other balls. always gotta go for that low-hanging fruit. The sport was Episkiros, and the ball they played with was made of leather filled with leather straps until the Romans later learned how to fill them with air. The earliest sort of modern ball. But in Rome, this game, now called Harpastum, became very big and filled huge arenas in front of crowds and spread across the entire Roman Empire, which includes modern-day Britain, where we now fast forward to the 12th century, where we now have medieval football in Western Europe. During this time, it was played in meadows and involved kicks, but also punching. Ugh. And in general, was a more rough-and-tumble sport, like a cross between soccer and rugby. Fun fact, Cinderace can learn the moves Sucker and Fire Punch. Obviously, these games got violent. I mean, 2 big teams, punches and tackles allowed, safety gear hasn't been invented yet. It was often played at lots of revelrous parties with beer. No wonder the game got royally banned for some time. Peasants were too distracted practicing and playing the game to do any work, and then they'd get injured while playing and can't work. Oof.
So no more game allowed!
For the adults anyway, the kids could still play it. Over the next few centuries, the sport would slowly evolve into modern football, though it was done as child's play, a means of exercising and tiring out school children. But many of those kids still loved the game even after growing up, so eventually, during the 15th century, the first official football clubs would appear. Teens and adults coming together to play the game of their childhoods, but with more safety measures in place. Then finally, in the 1820s, more organized clubs were formed, first in Scotland, and thus we had the first organized competitions. And finally, real, actual soccer, as we see it today, invented in the UK. Galar, so perfect. Oh, and look at Raboot. It's wearing a tracksuit hoodie with an attached neck gaiter. Great for athletes who want to practice or exercise while it's cold outside, which the UK tends to be. It's even wearing an athletic headband to keep its hair out of its face. And the attitude! Definitely another teen middle evo. Such, I'm so much better than this energy, pretending it doesn't actually care when it does. I'm too old and cool to play with these kids, and dad is so lame. A very stereotypical teen, which also relates to its hoodie, perhaps. It's a known psychological phenomenon that teenagers in the West often wear big hoodies all the time. The reason it's done, even if only subconsciously, is because of body image issues. Puberty is a spooky time. It makes many a teen feel more comfortable in something that covers up more of their body, even if they have to trade ease of staying cool for that. But like many a teenage phenomenon, it'll be grown out of. Until your midlife crisis anyway. But Cinderace ain't there yet. Cinderace is a football player through and through. Those extra spots on the feet it's so prominently displaying like some kind of sicko, those are like cleats. And it's got comfy and easy to wear shorts and compression leggings and a weird jersey looking thing. It's got a weird bit of hair that kinda resembles a bicycle racing helmet because it's fast maybe, or maybe it's like some depictions of those Aztec rabbit gods, or the weird headdresses that the Mesoamerican ball game players would wear, the ones that weren't literal animal heads anyway. But I mean, also just look at Cinderace's pyro ball animation. That is literally a soccer trick and kick. And look at Gigantamax Cinderace. Now the ball is huge, like a sun. Like how the ball in the Mesoamerican ball game represents the sun. Now it's like literally the sun almost. I also like how it sometimes poses itself like the classic football player's victory slide. And it's said that this giant fireball, with its face, has a will of its own. It's like inspirited, it's possessed. Maybe there's a soul inside it like the Mesoamerican balls with the skulls. Spooky. Though I do honestly wonder if the Mesoamerican aspects were actually considered when designing Cinderace, thanks to it being like the earliest part of the evolution of soccer, or if this is just merely a coincidence. Because I mean, like, sure, plenty of other Galarian Pokemon point to the colonies of the British Empire, but when it comes to the Americas, the British were like all over North America, but when it comes to South and Mesoamerica... Wait, what is that? Belize? I can't believe it. Modern Belize is in the southern part of the Yucatan Peninsula, where the capital of the Mayan Empire lays. And the Mayans, of course, controlled all of what is Belize today, which was smart because it was a very central location for their entire empire, for being on the coast anyway. In the late 18th century, the British fought the native Mayans in the area away because the Brits wanted mahogany for their chairs and desks. The British had cannons, warships, and steel, and the Mayans were busy also dealing dealing with the Spanish, so the Mayans lost, and the area soon became known as British Honduras. Over the next century, the Mayans would keep trying to get the area back, but to no avail, because cannons, warships, and steel. Horses, guns, and slaves to use as meat shields too. Yes, they brought slaves to the area as well. Can you believe it? Unfortunately, I easily can. The Spanish would later finish off the natives all across the Americas, but in the middle of this, they let the British keep this little zone. They may have been rivals, but they had a mutual respect for native eviction and slavers. And then much later in the 1970s, as they began preparations for independence, they renamed to Belize, adding yet another Independence Day from the British Empire celebration to the long, long list. And that entirely on-topic history lesson about a small nation you may have never heard of is important because it further reinforces the idea that Cinderace may be based at least somewhat on the fireball sun religious symbology found in the Mesoamerican ballgame, which itself is vaguely soccer-esque and the earliest example of a soccer-like sport. And it links to the British because the British colonized this area. Lots of other areas too, but that's for other videos. But as a set of three, these Pokemon are definitely fitting of each other. Each references a different aspect of British entertainment. I would argue that's their theme. You've got British movies, British music, and British sports. And truly, this is really the first time that the starter Pokemon all so perfectly fit the region they were in to this degree. Something the franchise has continued on to this day. What are your thoughts? What do you think of these three? Have anything to add? Let me know down below to help the algorithm be like, hey, this video's got comments, that's cool, and never stop using your noggin.